We now have Worre Hallberg from Sisters Hope, Copenhagen-based performance collective, who's going to make a presentation. And yeah, I think one of the last comments of this idea of visioning of actually trying to formulate a collective vision and actually create situations where this is acted out, you might say, is perhaps one way of linking these talks to actually Sisters Hope's practice. So thank you very much for coming, Gry, and I think we can hear you, and I think you're also ready to share your screen, maybe?
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction, Trevor. So I'll just start by sharing my screen and start the presentation, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So let's see. So let's see, I just need to. So yeah, thank you for the invitation to be part of this conversation. So Sisters Hope, as Trevor mentioned, is a Copenhagen-based performance group, but it's engaging performers from all over the world, and residency programs with people enrolling or staying for at least 48 hours, also from different parts of the world. But the practice is at the intersection of performance art, activism, research, and then an X. So I think in a way we should start in the activism part, because also in the presentation of me and the program, it says that we work from a proposition of a sensuous society. So sensuous society, spelled like this, is a potential future world that we imagine, and we have written a manifest. So this potential future world takes as its starting point the aesthetic dimension, in opposition to the dominating economic rationality and the hierarchy of perception created during the Enlightenment, where rational and cognitive thought is valued higher than bodily and tactile knowledge. So this potential future world is a society governed no longer by economic rationality, but by the aesthetic dimension. And central to the aesthetic dimension is the sensuous and poetic experience and perception of the world. So in such a society, the value system and the way you make decisions would start by asking, how does that evoke sensuous and poetic value, as opposed to today, where it's the premises of the economic dimension that kind of ultimately decides or defines the way we make decisions. And then you could say that if this was a scenario, it would just be a manifest, it would be a thought pattern, it would be an idea, a potential future. But because we are also a performance group, so our practice is performance art, that's the mythology that we are rooted in, then we have the ability to donate our bodies to the idea. So we don't only think about this vision or consider it, but that's one thing you can do with artistic practices. And we then use our performance art practice to embody the idea, to live it out, as you say. And since, as you also said, Trevor, a collective vision, so every time we manifest, we are rooted or based in the vision of a sensuous society. And all our performances are embodiments or explorations of what different dimensions of a sensuous society would be. So that's in a way embodying or acting out this collective vision for a while, temporary, until maybe, perhaps, potentially, it could become a permanent future where we would no longer participate temporarily, but inhabit it constantly. So I'm very interested right now. I'm also finishing a PhD about an artistic research PhD about the practice. So I'm very interested in the notion of moving from a participant to an inhabitant, because for a decade we have moved from spectators to participants. But I'm then now ahead of that and trying to look at how can we then begin to inhabit these worlds, which would be more permanent strategies perhaps, or the DNA of society would change. Within the performance art practice, we draw specifically on the strategies of immersion, intervention, and interactivity. So immersion, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with the term, but it kind of defines performance art strategies where you penetrate the work, where you immerse yourself in it, and typically, you use light, sound, and set design to create a world where you feel as if you've entered a different world, another world, where your whole body engages with the piece. And interactivity, of course, that's, I think, defining for all the practices presented here. So it's no longer an artist and an engager, but more like co-participants or inhabitants of a joint performative framework. And the intervention part is also very important. So we both create pieces, manifestations, as we call it, within art institutions, but also a lot of our practice is about intervening into contexts outside the art institution. And I have brought today 2 examples of that. One is called Sisters Academy, and that's the exploration of the educational system or the school of a sensuous society. And the other is Sensuous City that we do with Metropolis, where Trevor is a close partner in that project. So that's exploring the city in a sensuous society. What would a sensuous city be like? How would we organize the city if we were living in a sensuous society? And of course, that process to come to the research part is also a research process, an artistic research process of exploring, you could say, this overall research question of what is the city in that example of a sensuous society collectively through our practices and through the reflection on the practices and the theory framework that is also building up around it. So the X at the end is also, that could be city development, that could be educational development. It's whatever institutional context you might say that we move into to explore a certain aspect of a sensuous society. And by the way, it's called Sisters Hope because it was initiated by me and my poetic twin sister. So it's that's why, that's the reasoning behind it. And Sisters Academy is called Sisters Academy because it's the school of a sensuous society that was created by me and my poetic twin sister initially. But today, Sisters Hope is a performance collective constituted of, I think, hundreds of performers who have been through our performance program, developing what we call a poetic self, which you might also say is the self of a sensuous society, highlighting the poetic and sensuous aspects of our being, set designers, light and sound designers, documentarists, graphic designers. So it is a group and a movement, and everyone that become part of it, I think, common to everyone who reach out, it's because they share the intention, exactly this collective vision of exploring, or the desire or the urge or the curiosity to explore new futures, potential new worlds. And not, I think, to me also, sensuous society, it's not just patching the wound. And it is, I think the manifestations, as you say, Trevor, are microtopias, but I think also our ambition is actually to help carve the path towards a potential restructuring of the DNA of society. And that has happened previously. You know, we once moved from a society dominated by the religious dimension, then the political, and now the economic. So it's changed several times. And we could move into a new society governed by the aesthetic, and that is the sensuous and poetic dimension. Also, I want to say that in the manifest it says many times, it's not a utopia, it's a framework to explore futures within. Because of course, when we live it and should we move into it, new problems would arise. So I guess the concept of ecology is maybe an even more healthy concept than the sensuous, because ecology or ecological thinking is wholeness. and connectedness and understanding that everything is connected. But I think the sensuous and poetic can evoke that understanding. And that's why I think we have to pass through the sensuous and poetic in order to maybe move into potentially a utopian world or a healthier world than the current situation and the crisis we are facing because of our embeddedness in economic rationality. Okay, let me be a bit more concrete. So Sisters Academy, as the first project example, is a manifestation where we create a school, the School of Essential Society. So that manifests both within art institutions, where we transform an art institution into a boarding school, where everyone can buy a ticket and enroll for at least 24 hours to explore sensuous learning with us. And I think the reason we started in education is because, you know, also almost all ecological theory points that if we really want to change society, really, we have to change the mind of people. So this thing that it's through educational processes, or Bildung processes, på dansk, in Danish dannelse, that we ultimately really change society. So of course, institutional restructuring is extremely, immensely important, but ultimately it's the mind of people that will also facilitate or initiate those processes. And that's also why Gregory Bateson, in his groundbreaking book, Steps to an Ecology of Mind, even though he's a biologist, focuses exactly on the educational perspective of a mind, an ecology of mind, stimulating an ecology of mind. As a performance artist, I would of course also argue that we also need to stimulate a poetic and sensuous or ecological mode of being. So to also evoke the ontological level and not only the epistemologic level. But so Sisters Academy is both within the art institution, but it's also in the schools. So we do the interventions where we move into real youth schools and we take over the youth schools. So we lead the school for at least 2 weeks from the premise that we are now in a sensuous society. So the teachers, the schedule continues. There's math when there's math, geography when there's geography, philosophy when there's philosophy, and so forth. But all the teachers now have been trained in our performance method and teach their subject field from the premise that they are teachers in a sensuous society. So their research question is, how would I teach math sensuously? How would I teach philosophy sensuously, and so forth? And of course, we also transform the entire school. So we turn it into a landscape of color and sound and set design. This is a classroom with a student in it. So of course, the first things to do is also to deconstruct, to remove all chairs and tables and then reinstall in a new way. So this is a student in one classroom, and this is one of our performers in her tableaus at the school, where we also invite the students in between their other classes before and after school. They come to our tableaus. And Sensuous City, then, to move to the other example, as my time is short, is then exploring the city of a sensuous society. So in that format, we everyone can also, you know, participate as a citizen for at least 24 hours, and it's a walk. It's a walk in the city with a sleepover in a space that we have transformed visually into our immersive universe. And so the citizens, the participants or inhabitants explore with us what would the city of a sensuous society be. And we always give notebooks to people. So both in Sisters Academy and Sensuous City, by their arrival, people receive a notebook as part of an initiation ritual, and then we archive the notes afterwards. So we have built up this performance archive of thousands of notebooks of what I call in situ data that is transported directly out of the sensuous and poetic experience rather than before or after. What you very often do when you research aesthetics, you have to ask people before or after, how was it? Put a little squarely, but then you're already back in another mode of cognition than while you are immersed in the sensuous and poetic. So I don't know, lastly, I wanted to show you something a little bit from, walk you through Sensuous City in this article that explains actually the entire process of Sensuous City. So it's written by a man who participated in Sensuous City last year, and he wrote this, not as a reviewer, he wrote it on his own social media page, but then it was so beautiful that Eduard asked him to turn it into an article for their blog. So Sensuous City started at the City Hall. I think that's important. This is the Copenhagen City Hall, the governmental or the municipality building of Copenhagen. So it starts there, and then the citizens are received actually by the back door, where they go through a process of initiation. So this is inside the City Hall, and they're led to a chamber underneath the ground of the City Hall, where this poetic and sensuous is activated, and then afterwards they're taken. So this is also the City Hall, and after this initiation ceremony, and this is not us, it's not our set design, it's what the City Hall looks like. So this is actually the foundational stone of the City Hall that was built a little more than 100 years ago. So now maybe potentially could we move into a new paradigm of the city from here. Then the walks continue into the city, and I explore it in different ways, and then ending up on the first day in the Sisters Academy dormitory, Grand Hall, where we spend the night, eat, rest, constitute, and there are also night activities and evening activities. And then on the next day, we return to the City Hall, where, and this is actually Metropolis and Trevor that installed this. So this is now at the front entrance of the City Hall, where all the notes that they have taken are exhibited in mantras for a month. And that has, of course, a lot of viewers and people that kind of visits this, as this is a central community or tourist spot in the city. So these are some of the archive donation. Of course, what they find and what they write can be like here, a little stone, a plastic bag, something that in a moment represented the sensuous and poetic to them, and it's described and exhibited. And I think this, the last part, he writes here about the objects are quite precise. So he writes, the fact that the object may seem useless, a pale photograph found in a trash can, a piece of cardboard rescued from the gutter, or a fallen leaf picked up beneath a park bench, does not mean that the encounter is marginal. On the contrary, the very poverty of those treasures articulates a vision of another society, more alive to the poetic and the sensuous, where shared experiences rather than contractual obligations form the fabric of community. So I actually think I will allow that to be my final words. So thank you so much for listening in and for your time.